great show lined up for you. We got a great panel. We got great videos. But we're recording this the day after Super Tuesday, and now the Republicans have a problem, right? Because they have to choose between a guy who can't win and a guy they hate who probably can't win. Now, the bottom line is Romney has more money, but he always says creepy stuff. But don't forget, Bush was just like that too, and people still wanted to have a beer with him. Of course, they couldn't because he was an alcoholic. Now, Bush won. People still voted for him, even though they knew that stuff. More people didn't vote for him, but their votes didn't count, okay? So now Mitt Romney, nobody wants to have a beer with Mitt Romney, which works out fine for him because he's a Mormon and he's not allowed to drink. But people don't even want to have a cup of coffee with Romney, which also works out because he can't have coffee either. Now, Romney and Santorum are equally flawed candidates, although Santorum is much funnier. Just look him up. The thing about Mitt Romney, I say we give Mitt Romney the nomination and have Santorum running some loser third-party candidate because politics is all about compromise, right? Sometimes you don't get what you want, and other times you still don't get what you want, but it's later. Okay, now let's meet. We got a great show for you. Let's, who are the videos from today? Well, we have 3 interesting point videos this week. One from Pentagon.net blogger, Pentagon.net blogger, Amanda Marcotte, and on just what the GOP really thinks about women who use birth control. I wonder what they think. Another from the Center for American Progress senior fellow, Joseph Romm. He's asking when we're going to get serious about the climate crisis. I'm going to guess not until the water gets to our front door. And then for our final point, we've got a trailer from the documentary Race to Nowhere, all about the toll our high-pressure educational culture is taking on today's kids. Yeah. Joining me on the panel today, we have Dr. Christopher Ryan next to me, co-author of the New York Times bestseller, Sex at Dawn. I like a guy who writes books about sex. Huh?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
So does my wife.
All right, none of my business. Okay. We also have Boise Thomas, who's an actor, activist, and also the host of the Beastie Boise podcast.
That's correct.
I like that Beastie Boise
big fan,
podcast.
yeah.
Of Boise or the Beastie Boys?
Of Beastie Boys and Boise, you know, that's a good town.
We're big in Boise.
Yeah.
Okay. And next to us, of course, is Ana Kasparian, co-host of the Young Turks. Welcome to The Point,
Thank
Anna.
you.
I
love being here.
Okay. All right, so let's go to our first video right now from, it's about, of course, Rush Limbaugh. We all know what happened with Rush Limbaugh. We've been over it. He called
Sandra
Fluke a slut and a prostitute, and he immediately recognized the egregious ways he overstepped the line, and he then spent 3 more days insulting her before he did the courageous thing and waited for his sponsors to abandon ship before he stepped up and gave a half-hearted apology. Of course, no man stands taller when he gives an insincere apology to make some more money. Okay, so let's go to Amanda Marcotte's video.
Hi, I'm Amanda Marcotte from the blog Pentagon.net. My point today is that despite media reports to the contrary, Rush Limbaugh has not actually apologized for his attacks on Sandra Fluke and all American women. And neither have all the various pundits and politicians echoing his attacks on women. Limbaugh merely said that he regrets the words he used, but he stands by his argument that women who use contraception are irresponsible and immoral. Mitt Romney basically agreed, saying, quote, "I'll just say this, which is that's not the language I would have used," end quote, when asked about Rush Limbaugh's attacks. That makes it sound like the problem is using the word slut, and not with the claim that 99% of American women who use contraception are bad people. I don't know if Republicans just forgot that women have had the vote since 1920, but it seems the official party platform now is to believe that nearly every single adult woman in this country is worthless and immoral just because she has sex. I'm Amanda Marcotte, and you can follow me on Twitter at Amanda Marcotte and visit my blog, Pentagon.net.
Okay, she makes some great points, I think, but I'm going to ask the first question to you, Chris. Why are we still debating in 2012 whether women who use birth control are sluts or not?
I don't know that we're debating it. I think some idiots are proclaiming it and the rest of us are shaking our heads in disbelief. You know what I mean?
Yes, I do know what you mean, but it still seems to be kind of an effective attack, right, on women?
Well, I don't think it is. I think what it is a last gasp of the religious right. People often ask us, if we've been attacked for our book, which proclaims that monogamy doesn't necessarily come naturally to human beings. And my answer is not as much as I was hoping for, not as much as I was expecting. Where is the outrage? What's happening, I think, is that the right is completely discredited. You've got Newt Gingrich proclaiming himself to be the ethical standard bearer, who on his third wife, he cheated on the first two while they were sick. We all know the story. You've got, this guy, Rush Limbaugh. He's on his fourth wife, I believe. He's, a well-known drug abuser, Viagra spokesman. Unofficially.
It sounds like you don't believe in redemption.
Well, he can redeem himself, but he's got a long way to go.
Okay.
In the Catholic Church, who in the Catholic Church is going to tell us how to live our lives sexually, except for Rick Santorum?
I'm going to guess all of them.
Yeah, right. But, they come and tell us how to live our lives, and then they go have sex with altar boys. So it's the religious right, the sort of conservative social right is completely discredited. And so the way I read this is the last gasp of people before they go over the waterfall. This is it.
Well, let me switch over to you, Boise, and ask you, do you think there's, there still seems to be definitely a double standard in America when it comes to sex. Do you see that ever going away?
I don't know. It just seems like we're always lagging behind Europe or other countries in our sexual maturity. I remember when I lived in England for a short time. I just remember Page 2 always having some naked breasts and just wanting to read the news, and there it is. They just feed you a set of breasts every time you open the newspaper. But
were you more informed when you lived in England?
Was that in advance?
Yeah.
I'm not sure which
I felt like I was more tapped into what's going on globally, just because of those two hands.
Globally, sure.
No, but I don't know. I don't know if we'll ever catch up. But I can say I had a vasectomy in 2002 because I wanted to make sure that I wasn't going to bring any unwanted children into the world, and that was just my particular choice. But I can tell you, if they banned that, I definitely would have gone down to some butcher in an alley, as they like to paint the picture, and gotten my deference snipped off the books of the government, because I don't want them telling me what I can do with my testicles, and I don't think they have any right to tell a woman how she can protect herself. And I think it's one of the last rights a woman has is to whether or not she wants to procreate. And I know a lot of single dads that would have liked to have their kids later in life, but they didn't have that choice because they got their partner pregnant, and now they're raising the child themselves. So I just think the government and the church, thanks for bringing that up so I didn't have to say that, should just get their politics and their religion off of a woman's choice, because the last great thing a woman can do is make a baby and bring life in. I think that's up to them, and that's my particular view on it.
Now, and as far as the shaming goes, now, is slut really still, does you feel shame? Has anyone ever called you a slut in a way that made you feel shamed?
To be honest with you, I don't talk about my sexual activity, my use of contraception, all of that stuff. I keep it very private, and part of the reason why I keep it private is because slut shaming is still something that takes place in the United States. And Boise, I think you're totally right when you talk about how we're so behind when it comes to sexuality in this country, accepting sexuality in this country. It's a really big problem. But Christopher, going back to your point about how you feel it's the last gasp of the religious right, this has some serious ramifications in this country, because even though it might seem like they're being discredited, in a lot of different red states in this country, including Mississippi and Alabama, you're seeing women being prosecuted right now for having miscarriages, right? Because what will happen is extreme right-wingers will look at their past, and if they had any history of drug use, they'll say, look at that. They purposely took drugs in order to have a miscarriage. That's what's happening. Yeah. There are actual women out there, one of them by the name of Rennie Gibbs, who was prosecuted as a result of miscarrying her own baby. So there are actual consequences right now. Sure. And while we like to think that we're dismissing lunatics like Rush Limbaugh, there are people who are giving these people a tremendous amount of credit.
Yeah, no question.
Yeah.
I don't mean, when I say the last gasp, I don't mean to say that it's irrelevant or that they don't have a lot of political power in this country. They obviously do. I look at this law in Virginia where women have to have this probe to do an ultrasound before. It's insane,
it's
crazy.
Well, even Tennessee is passing a law right now that's very similar to that. A woman, if she's going to have an abortion, she has to first listen to the heartbeat of the baby.
Yeah,
that's new.
Let me give you something even more ridiculous. Today we did a story on the Young Turks show about how in Georgia, the House in Georgia right now is debating a bill that would ban abortions past 20 weeks, even in the case case of a fetus that is not developing a brain, right? And this Republican comes up to the floor and makes the argument that, look, it's a life experience to give birth to a fetus that doesn't have a brain. I deliver calves that don't make it in my farm. I deliver piglets that don't make it in my farm. Comparing women to farm animals, you know, they're not logical people.
So it's just, but it is all about, like, all these laws are about shame. Right? Are they not? Isn't it about shaming a woman for what she's wanting to do? When you make a woman have to take a medical procedure that isn't necessary when she's pregnant and wants an abortion, that's shaming her. Look what you're doing, you horrible person. You want to listen to the heartbeat? You're a bad person. And I mean, sexual shame, I mean, can you talk about the origins of it and how it's changed?
I mean, what it's about is controlling women's reproductive capacity. And it's very interesting, the farming analogy, because if you look in the Old Testament, the line we all know, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, right? If you it sounds like they're talking about the sanctity of marriage and respecting your neighbor's marriage and relationships. But if you read that in context, it continues, nor his house, nor his ox, nor his she-ass, nor his manservant and maidservant. So it's not about the marriage, it's about not coveting his stuff. And the wife is just one of his things.
Possession, yeah.
Right. And so, you know, what we try to outline in the book is that this male impulse to control female sexuality came about with the advent of agriculture no more than 10,000 years ago, because that's when it first became important to keep track of who was the father of whom, right? And the reason for that is because we had property. So now we've got land and animals and buildings and all these things that we want to leave to our sons. So I have to control who she's having sex with because that's the only way I know they're my sons, right?
Okay.
And so shame is the best way to control anybody, and it works really well on women.
And that's what Rush was really trying to do. He's trying to control that woman.
Exactly. That's why he says, one thing I would disagree with in the video is she said that they're saying that 99% of women are sluts because they have sex. No, it's because they have sex with birth control, which means they're taking control of their reproductive lives.
Oh, right, okay.
Right? As long as there's no birth control, the man controls whether she gets pregnant or not.
And that's where I jump in as well, around power. I think it's just the man, literally the man, the male side of humanity, trying to keep the power away from the women. Because if you notice in our generation, women are rising up. I'm like, Hillary 2016, that's a real possibility. And I think this is all just precursor, preamble for let's not let the woman get too much power. I say let's give the woman a shot. As men, we screwed it up enough. Let's give it to the women and let's see if we can even this thing out, or maybe they can do a better job. And I think that's all part of it. The property, the last name, the hyphenating, all this business that's happened since, you know, the 20s and suffrage and voting. We can't let them have equal rights. You can't be totally equal.
And the hyphenating, I'm sure it bothers a lot of men out there.
Probably, And certainly the ones that don't want to hyphenate probably don't want to marry those type of women.
You know, I just want to make one point before we get, I want to get back to the word slut, but
of course you
a lot of people I've noticed today, just before we're coming in to tape this, they're making the false equivalency between what Bill Maher, when he called Sarah Palin the C word, and when Ed Schultz called Laura Ingraham also a slut. And they're saying, well, when Bill Maher did it, how come nobody screamed? And the difference is, and as a professional comedian, I'm going to tell you what the difference is, okay?
The distinction.
When you are ridiculing someone in power, that's called comedy. When you are ridiculing someone who is powerless, that's called bullying. That's the difference. Rush likes to say he uses satire. He's a satirist. He's not a satirist. He's just a bully. And that's the difference. And you know what? If you were going to be a comedian, I wouldn't open with your I hate women chunk, okay? Maybe talk about the traffic and your weight first, okay? Get people to like you. All right, but now there are some people trying to take back the word slut, right?
We do. In the book, we say Darwin says your mother's a whore. We say she's a slut.
Well, I think you're splitting hairs a little, right?
No, because a whore, the difference between, Rush Limbaugh doesn't know what a slut is.
And by the way, leave my mother out of this.
Sorry.
Right?
For me anyway, the difference between a whore and a slut is that a whore has sex for money or for things. And according to the Darwinian view, all women have always traded sex for protection
something.
and meat and whatever, right, from the male. No meat jokes.
Yeah.
But what we say in the book is no, women enjoy sex. Women have sex for the same reason men have sex, because they like it. It's a way to connect to another person and so on. So a slut is a woman who has sex because she likes it.
So, yeah, okay, so that's it.
Which is not shameful from where I'm coming from.
And there's a movement right now.
Slut walking.
Yes, and there's actually even a book called The Ethical Slut.
Yes.
Sure, that's by Dossie Easton.
Oh, look at you guys. I'm not telling you nothing you don't know. Okay, well, let me tell Anna.
Yeah, no, I actually really love this, and I can't believe I'm about to make a Real Housewives reference, but I'm going to do it.
Okay.
So on the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, there's Eddie Cibrian's ex-wife. I forget what her name is, but the women in the show kept calling her a slut because she had a very foul mouth and she was very open about her sexuality. And during the reunion show, she's like, you know what? Yeah, I'm a slut. Kiss my ass.
Right.
And I love that.
Yeah.
You know, you shouldn't feel ashamed for being adventurous in your sex life. This double standard is ridiculous, and we should take back the word slut.
Yeah.
So I'm in favor of that. I think it's great.
And one final point, and I'll throw it to the panel. When we shame people for shaming people, you know what I mean? When we shame
spiral.
When we shame Rush Limbaugh for being a bully, right, and we tell people you can't call a girl a slut and you can't call a woman a prostitute and you can't be mean to them, does that not push it underground? Because I know that, and this might seem a little crass, but I grew up in the 80s watching porno on VHS tapes. And it seems like the men who made the videos back then liked women a lot more than they did, right? You know, somebody rang the doorbell. They came in, they had pizza, maybe a TV got fixed.
Right.
You know?
Some plumbing gets done.
Now it's that computer porn, it's just, the camera's too close,
Yeah.
and
Yes.
I don't. So do you think that by us being in public nicer or trying to be, is it push it underground?
I'll start with that, Jimmy. I think, you know, with the advent of the screen generation, I just think we're all entirely desensitized.
Definitely.
And I think we've taken the object of women as possession and reduced it even further from the opportunity to deliver a pizza to like, you're going to be the thing I'm going to use today. And I think that's the big piece, that we're just totally unplugged and desensitized. And I think people spend way too much time in front of screens and not enough time in front of each other. So that's my spin on that.
But on the other hand, because of the proliferation of screens and the internet and all that, there's a lot of sort of women-owned and controlled porn now.
Yes.
So, and a lot of the people who buy porn, I think it's about 40 to 50%, last statistic I read, are women. So, you know, on one hand, you get all this gonzo, horrible stuff.
Yes.
But on the other hand, you do have much more woman-centered, sort of, you know, romantic angles to it.
Yeah, there's more of that angle. It feeds it. And I know a lot of other cultures, I won't generalize the ethnicities, but I know that sex is so suppressed that this is also where a lot of women are going nowadays to find out about sex, as they're renting videos.
Right.
So.
That's and that is amazing to me. But we got to wrap it up, and we got to get to our next point, and we'll be right back after this. Hi, welcome back to The Point. I'm guest host Jimmy Dore, and our next video comes from the Center for American Progress Senior Fellow, Joseph Romm, and it's about climate change.
Hi, I'm Joseph Romm. I run the blog climateprogress.org, and my point is that the greatest challenge facing humanity is global warming, and yet we're not taking action, and political leaders have stopped talking about it, and the media hardly covers it. Decades ago, scientists warned that if we keep pouring billions of tons of heat-trapping carbon pollution into the atmosphere every year from burning fossil fuels, we would have more intense heat waves, we'd start having more severe droughts, more superstorms, we'd see melting ice, all the things that we're seeing now. We've done nothing for decades. Now scientists tell us if we don't act soon, then we're going to see even more intense droughts and superstorms and dust bowls, and it's going to be especially hard to feed 7, 8, and 9 billion people when we're disrupting the agricultural system so greatly. Food prices are already at record levels. So how are we going to start taking action? And by action, I mean aggressive deployment of clean energy like solar and wind and energy efficiency and, of course, conservation. How are we going to get people start talking about this issue and develop some movement towards action? Because right now we have conservatives who are denying the science. President Obama doesn't even talk about climate change, and the media barely reports on the story. There were 14 stories in the network news last year alone. So, of course, people can become informed if they come to my blog, climateprogress.org, where I try to collect and be a destination site for everything you need to know about climate science, solution, and politics. Thank you.
He makes some great points. The media isn't covering it. The president, who's supposed to be a progressive, isn't talking about climate change. Boise, let me ask you, I mean, in this kind of political environment, do you see us ever really addressing climate change? Can we ever turn this around?
You know, I had some time to think about this before the show, obviously. And, you know, one of the reasons I got a vasectomy is I think there's too many people on the planet. I think we're actually the problem, you know, and if you look at the statistics, there's no way we're going to be able to feed 9 billion people by the year 2050. So all these things that are happening with the planet, I think, are inevitable. Whenever you have something, an organism that takes over, it's a virus, and then the host will heat up. So if you get a fever, it's because you have a virus. So I think the Earth is sick. I think it's got a virus. And I've done I've been in the green space here in Hollywood since 2006 and did stuff for Discovery Planet Green and had started online websites and pretty well versed in this world. But I'd like to take it away from the environment and just take it to a family. So if we were a family and your dad was an alcoholic and your mom was cheating and your sister was introverted, you'd have so many problems in your household that nobody would be complaining that the kitchen's filthy or that there's mold on the bathroom. Because you just don't have the space, the bandwidth to focus on what really matters. So I think as a culture, we have so many ills happening in our society that sure, the politics aren't going to cover it. And sure, the scientists aren't going to get the front page of the press and it's going to be all woo-woo doomsday. But I think what you're seeing is everything coming to a head. And, you know, I'm all for $6 a gallon. We're going to see $5 a gallon here in the next couple weeks, maybe next month or so.
It.
I'm all for bringing it up to $6, $7. Let's have people really get what's the cost of being fueled by something the Earth can no longer provide. It's not sustainable.
Well, they say that our gas prices are artificially low in the United States, which they are.
They are.
And
$10 a gallon in England.
But Anna, let me ask you, how do we combat this when most of the people who vote speak about climate change like this? They'll say something like, well, I don't believe in global warming, as if it was a rumor they heard at a party. You know, hey, I heard Joey was talking about this thing. No, it's it's a fact. You can check it. It's like, dude, that bothers me when people are allowed to say, it's not what I believe. I don't believe in it. Isn't it like either you accept the scientific fact or you don't accept scientific fact? Do you think that, you feel the same way?
I love that you brought up scientific fact, because you got to keep in mind that when it comes to climate change, corporate interests play a massive role. So the Koch brothers, for instance, right, they profit significantly from their oil business. So as a result, they want to continue drilling for oil. What do? They literally pay scientists to publish phony facts about climate change. In fact, they're trying to have an influence in grade school curriculum.
Right.
They spent $100,000 on influencing grade school curriculum to basically push this idea that climate change is controversial. There's no real science behind it. Scientists are still debating as to whether or not it exists. In the meantime, you see acidification of the oceans. Okay, we probably won't have coral reefs by 2050 as a result of the CO2 being absorbed by the ocean. But who cares? We're ignoring this issue. And also the media, they have corporate interests at hand as well. The mainstream media isn't going to talk about this issue. They don't want to piss off the Koch brothers or oil industries or companies that are funding them.
You're exactly right about that. I mean, the problem is the people who want to deny science seem to have a hold on the media too, and that's a big. But some people have kind of suggested that we can, if we attack climate change the same way we attacked smoking in America, that we could. Do you think any hope for something like that?
No, we're completely fucked.
Yeah, I was hoping Dr. Sachs would say we're fucked, 'cause
as
we're
a doctor, I'd like to say.
As a doctor.
No, I mean, I would modify your metaphor just a little bit.
Great,
that
please.
it's not mold in the kitchen; it's termites eating the foundation of the house.
Very good. Very
You know what
good.
I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah.
So we're ignoring something that seems to be minor because it's gradual, but it's going to bring down the whole
That's
damn
right,
house.
that's right.
And human beings are not. We haven't evolved to understand gradual risk. That's why people don't save money, myself included, because we don't understand like how to calculate things over time. We're good at immediate
Yeah, very
problems.
good.
Fix the problem that's, the things happening right now, but something that's going to happen over time, hey, I'm going to have another smoke or another this or another that. I'll worry about it when it comes, But I think that
Don't you think, but how do you talk to people who, like, how do you talk to people?
I say what he says. I say we're screwed. This is not going to turn out
I'm
well.
talking, how do you talk to people who deny the science?
It's almost like talking to somebody who drinks too much and they're just going to keep drinking. Like
Right.
they can't admit they have a
You can't convince
problem.
those people. You have to convince the people who aren't educated on the topic and who are genuinely curious about it. And those people exist. And I think that in a lot of cases, you can use like social media, for instance, to really grab people's attentions. Today we did this story about invisible children and how they're trying to bring awareness to Joseph Kony, who's this horrible, despicable guy in Africa who's murdering, raping children in several different countries in Africa. And what they did is they utilized social media to educate people for this. Why can't we utilize social media to educate people about what's happening to our oceans, what's happening to our environment, and the extreme weather that has basically been produced as a
Because the guy who owns
because of
Facebook
what
is a
you
conservative? Maybe that's why.
And who owns everything else by their very nature? The owners of the means of production and the means of the media and so on and so forth want things to stay the way they are. Because they're at the top of the heap, So that's why I think we're kind of.
I think that like campaign finance, Cenk is working on this with campaign finance reform. I think that would have just as big as an effect on anything with climate change.
Yeah. But I mean, your connection with smoking. The problem with this is international. So even if campaign finance reform passed, what are we going to tell to the Chinese and the Indians?
Well, that's the big problem,
and the
right?
Brazilians
Because economic growth seems to be tied with warming the earth. Yeah. So how do you tell people to stop building economically in your country because we already have all our stuff?
Yeah, like Nate, to the smoking, just riding that thought. I think, until the cough produces blood, or until the doctor says you've got 2 months to live. I really think until the planet needs a respirator, I don't think we're going to get the point. And I love what you mentioned about human beings' attention span, and we don't have the foresight to reach out in the future and say, wow, this really isn't going to end well. And and we could all go doomsday and look at all the statistics, but if you look at everything that's coming to a head, socially, economically, the Occupy movement, the environment, the collapse of our systems, financially, religion and the politics coming together, if it ain't the planet, something's going to get us. And I think until we realize, okay, we have a collective problem here. That's why I love the sci-fi movies, because it involves the world coming together to defeat an alien.
Yeah,
and it makes human race a team of people together. And until we find a way to do that, I don't think we're going to get there without some
It is a
alarming
collective
thing.
problem, and I think the bigger problem is that Americans are individualists, right? And and they're not going to really work on something until it affects them. And what would you like to see President Obama and the Democrats doing right now on climate change?
Well, the amazing thing is how unprogressive he is on this issue and how he just avoids the issue completely. I would love him to at least talk about it. I would love him to at least raise awareness about it and stop pretending as if it's not an issue that exists. I don't know if Obama is the person who's going to ignore corporate interests. He hasn't so far. But I do agree with you, and I definitely agree with Cenk, that corporate interests here are definitely the bad guys, and they're definitely the ones that give politicians an incentive to ignore it. And also keep in mind, a lot of politicians want to ignore climate change because they're afraid of this idea of big government. They don't want the government involved in the way we live our lives. They don't want the government regulating the way we live our lives. They say that.
Unless it's our vaginas and
Exactly.
Probing me for this, that, and
I
that.
would like to see your vagina.
They want to shrink government down to the size it can fit in a vagina.
Yes.
That's what they want to do.
That's it. Okay,
Yeah.
well,
We're really
we're going to end on that point. That was great. And speaking of education, we're going to come right back with our point about education. Welcome back to The Point. I'm here with an amazing panel. Right, our final point comes to us. It's a trailer for the movie Race to Nowhere.
I can't really remember the last time I had a chance to go in the backyard and just run around.
School's just so much pressure that every day I would wake up dreading it.
I'm afraid that our children are going to sue us for stealing their childhoods.
I would spend 6 hours a night on my homework.
You have to get into the top schools.
You have to take tests and do interviews.
It's gone way to the extreme.
We're all caught up in it.
In America, if you don't earn a lot of money, something went wrong.
The pressure comes from the colleges, from the parents, from the government, but it has to stop.
You have to do well now so you can get into a good college.
Everyone expects us to be superheroes.
You have a fear from the parents that my kid needs to be able to get a job.
How do you expect us to do well when you can't even make mistakes?
You're dedicating your whole life to your grades.
You have to be smart and you have to be involved in the arts.
I have soccer practice every day, plus the homework on top of that.
Produce.
It's impossible. I couldn't cope.
I've gone through bouts of depression just because you feel so swamped.
I almost had emotional breakdown.
There have been 6 suicides in our school district.
Our students are pressured to perform. They're not necessarily pressured to learn deeply and conceptually.
So what is that going to mean when we have a whole population of dentists and doctors who've been trained from a script?
Things that actually get our students to think are pushed aside.
These kids come to the table with this creativity and this love of learning. Let's just not take it out of them.
I think the United States really needs to rethink how we do schooling. The economic future of the country depends on our addressing this.
We need to redefine success for kids. It's got to be something we do together. All of us as a society, almost as a movement.
Jobs need you to be a critical thinker. They need you to be a problem solver.
We need to really think, what does it take to produce a happy, motivated, creative human being?
Okay, can't wait to go to school. Now, talk about your classic first world problem, right? Kids are getting too much school. Anna, how big of a problem do you think this is in America?
I think the nowhere part of this is the biggest problem because these kids go through so much schooling and in the end there's higher education that is no longer obtainable. It's too expensive. A lot of students are discouraged. They feel like they can't afford it and they can't achieve a college education. So that's the real issue here. But when it comes to the pressure and the competition within school, I actually don't have a problem with it, and I think a lot of schools actually lack it. A lot of schools don't have high expectations of students. There was one school in Pacoima, which is a part of the Valley here in Los Angeles, where I had to go speak to these students. I didn't have to, I wanted to. And the reason why I went to speak to them is because they needed someone to motivate them, to tell them, hey, look, you could be born in a low-income family, but you can achieve great things in your lives. They haven't been told those things. A lot of students don't feel pressure. They feel like no one really believes in them. Now, there's another issue that I want to bring up really quickly. I think there's too much pressure when it comes to standardized testing, and there's not enough creativity, which is very, very harmful for these students because they should find what they're passionate about. They should find what they want to have a career in, and they should nurture those passions, right? But they're not really taught to do that. They're taught to take a test, right? The SATs is a perfect example. When I took SAT prep classes, it wasn't about learning. It was about, okay, what's the best strategy to pass this test and get into a good college? That's not education. That's a joke.
And you make a great point about the test taking, which test taking just leads to cheating, which we've already seen happening, right? Because if you tie a teacher's pay to the test scores of their students, she's going to cheat, and so are the kids, and so is the principal and so is the school. If you're, I mean, why wouldn't they do it? They do it in every other business, right? They cheat to make money if their money's tied to something. So, you also brought up about when you had to go to Pacoima and you had to encourage those kids. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with the blue eye, brown eye study that was done a long time ago. So this teacher took her kids, and the blue eye kids and the brown eye kids, she separated them. And she said the brown eyed kids were the greatest students, they did everything right, and the blue eye kids didn't do anything right. And she, over a year, she showed how kids will become what you tell them they are.
Exactly.
And so what you're saying is that kids in those schools, no one's ever told them that, but in these schools that we just saw, that's all they're telling them, is that if you don't achieve, if you don't get that, and what the hell is wrong with, now, I don't understand, like, I grew up and I had 11 brothers and sisters, and we all played sports, nobody drove us anywhere. People are like, oh, I gotta drive my kid to soccer practice, and my other kid's a violin, and doesn't your kid have a bike? Can't your kid drive too?
Well,
so
in
do you
California.
think do you think we put
no birth control in your family?
No birth.
He's going to call your mother
no
a slut.
birth control.
Yeah, be careful with your family.
We were good Catholic. My parents were very Catholic. They almost molested somebody. And anyway, but don't you think that we kind of are too kid-centric? I mean, that's what this is. People are putting pressure on their kids because they'll feel like a failure if their kid isn't a super success, right? Do you think that?
Well, let me start by saying I don't have any kids.
Okay.
So,
Neither do I. This
fair,
is a great,
fair
disclosure.
disclosure.
Great topic.
Fair disclosure. And I never wanted to have any kids, okay? Not that I got a back alley vasectomy, but I should have. My take on this is similar to the sexual stuff we were talking about earlier. People don't seem willing to accept the fact that we are apes. I get letters from people saying, you're an idiot, you talk like we're apes. Of course we're apes. What do you think we are? We're not angels, we're animals.
I was made by Jesus.
Yeah, okay. Well, the rest of the panel, we're apes.
I'm from an alien, I'm from another planet.
I'm the only ape here today.
No, I understand.
I am also an ape.
So what is that?
So
what does that mean?
The point is, you don't take a young ape, even a highly intelligent ape like us, and put it in a room and say, now sit there for 8 hours and listen to this old boring person talk. And don't freak out, because they're going to freak out. Of course they're going to freak out. They need to run. There are natural ways to learn. Right. And what we're doing is, like they say that the generals always fight the last war, and we're still building these bombers for the Soviet Union, and it's this crazy stuff. Well, the educational system teaches to the last economy. We're teaching for an industrial economy that doesn't exist anymore, where it's all about obedience to authority, showing up, ringing the bell, go here, go there, do this, punch that, do that. That's not the way the world is anymore, right? That's not where the jobs are. Those jobs, the industrial jobs, are all in China. So these kids are being taught to live in a world that doesn't exist.
You're saying you want kids to go to college? What kind of a snob?
I know, yeah. I'm not saying I want them to go to college. I'm saying I want our educational system to adapt to what we are and the world we're in.
A great example of that is Finland. And Finland used to have...
you son of a gun. I was going to say that.
Am I stealing your points?
Okay.
Finland's a great example because they used to have a huge issue with their education. They had a very old school model. But what they did is, first of all, they started making the position of a teacher a prestigious job, right? Which is the most important thing. Because right now, you're not attracting the best teachers in the world when you treat them like crap, right? You give them
treat them like prison guards.
You do, exactly. And also, they changed the curriculum. They changed the curriculum to basically emphasize on creativity rather than standardized testing. They're like, you know what? Standardized tests, we're throwing them out the window. We're going to try to,
This is what they did in Finland.
This is in Finland. I wish this happened in the United States. And it was funny because there's this international study, it's called PISA, and they decided that they were going to test Finland after they threw out the standardized testing. And Finland's like, yeah, we're going to fail because we're not teaching our kids how to take tests, but we don't care. And it turns out that they were the top scoring country.
Let me, before I go to you boys, let me just make a point follow up to that. You hear people like Tom Brokaw, I just saw yesterday on television, say, we have to try everything when it comes to education, which means nothing. He doesn't mean everything. He doesn't mean what Finland did, what Finland did when they realized that they didn't have an economy, that they had to educate their people to invent an economy. They decided to put not one teacher in the classroom, not two teachers in the classroom, but 3 teachers in a classroom with no larger than 20 students, and the teachers stay with each class for 3 years, so they get to know the students, right? So when people say we have to try everything, they don't mean everything. They mean we have to cut pay for teachers, we have to more standardized tests, more race to the top bullshit. That's what they mean. They don't mean try everything. So when you hear that, now, did you have a lot of pressure put on you as a student, Boise? Because you're certainly an overachiever.
Yeah, I basically, you know, my parents split up and got back together, so I had that whole divorce parent young age thing. So you kind of latchkey kid and you kind of find your way. But you know, after school my whole thing's balance. I had after school activities. I like to be on sports teams, and then I got involved. We had a TV program at my high school in New York where I'd go after school. We'd make programs just like this. You know, not as classy as this, but you know, you get the idea. We talk about subjects, and we were 14, 15, 16 years old. So I found that for me, it wasn't just about the grade. And I was like a C student in high school and like a B+ student in college. So for me, I achieved later, but because I found the balance. And I think today, especially with this, you know, the trailer, I'm so happy this mother made this film. And while she was making it, one of the 13-year-olds killed themselves over a math score. So I'm happy that this film's being made, but I think this is, again, more of the theme of this point is we're screwed. You know, we talked about women, we're screwed. We talked about the climate, we're screwed. We're talking about education, we're screwed. So I think people in all those things need to take back their power. Take back your family, take back your community, take back your world, and really own it. And I think the big thing for me is owning your level of desire to learn. And I love to learn. I'm a sponge. I ask questions like I'm a 5-year-old kid. Where'd you get that shirt? And why do you do your hair that way? And tell me about your sexcapades, right?
Yeah,
so I'm all about inquiring. I think that's what we're stifling with tomorrow's leaders. Is we're stifling the inquiry.
To answer your question,
that's
Macy's
natural.
and to get laid.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm all about let the kids flower and become people who want to find out answers versus feeding them what they should know. So that's where I come from.
Does culture, how much does culture play into this? I mean, this really seems like a rich culture, but also when you know, I don't know much about, but it seems like the Korean culture emphasizes, Asian culture emphasizes studies and education a lot more than other cultures. And do you think that there's always been this pressure on kids who are in the upper classes, or do you think this is a new phenomenon?
The pressure has always been there, and you know.
Did you feel pressure when you were in school?
I wasn't considered the upper classes, but I definitely felt that pressure. And you know, I had a bit of a tiger mom. You know, making a reference to that Asian mother who
not a cougar mom, but a tiger mom.
No, not the cougar mom, but definitely tiger mom.
Okay, good.
Although if I called my mom the cougar mom, she might be amused by that.
Okay.
But you know, that competition, I have to be honest, I enjoyed it. You know, that pressure, I enjoyed it, and I work well under pressure, but I understand that other students don't. And I feel like, you know, that competition gave me an advantage, and it was something that I thought about day and night. The only thing that I hated was the standardized testing, because I didn't think that it measured my intelligence. I think that it was the dumbest way of trying to gauge a student's intelligence and whether or not they should be accepted into a university.
I just always, I at an early age learned to not be pressured by school, and it didn't seem important to me. And the people, and not that I couldn't achieve, because some of the smart kids would even cheat off me on science tests, but I wouldn't ever study or pay attention. And everything, the guys who did, one of the guys who was the smartest kid in my class growing up, now he's an engineer and he designs farm equipment. So I'd rather be doing this than that. And so I would
He's
just
not watching.
He's a great guy, great guy. But let me just tell you, my advice to you kids in school: relax. It's not that important. It's about who you know.
Thank you. That's actually sage advice. That's really great.
And we'll be right back. We're going to end this segment. We'll be coming right back for a goodbye. And let me thank our panel for being here today. We had a great panel with Christopher Ryan. Here's his book, Sex at Dawn. Let me hold it up so you can all look at it. I've already thumbed through it, and it got me excited. All right, Sex at Dawn. Thanks for being here. We have Boise Thomas. You can catch Boise Thomas at boisethomas.com, right? And, of course, Ana Kasparian, you see here, right here at the Young Turks. And I'm Jimmy Dore, and you can catch me at jimmydorcomedy.com. And I want to thank our point contributors, Amanda Marcotte, who blogs at pandagon.net, and Joseph Romm, whose further insights into the climate crisis can be found at climateprogress.org. And thank you for watching The Point. Till next time, be the best you can be, and I'll keep being me.